Forum Remake the Model Conversation Series. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Melissa Cowley-Wolf. I'm the director of the Arts Funders Forum and the founder of MCW Projects, which is an advisory firm specializing in next era philanthropic strategy and organizational wellness. I want to thank our 2023 series sponsor, Kickstarter, for supporting today's program. Thank you so much. The Arts Funders Forum is a media platform focused on convening, research, and advocacy. We aim to shape the future of cultural philanthropy by increasing private support for arts and culture. With a community of over 5,000 engaged philanthropists and funders, artists, cultural leaders, experts, and much more, our mission is to explore new models of impact-driven financial support for the cultural sector, specifically by engaging the next generation in cultural philanthropy and advocacy. We launched the platform in 2018 against the backdrop of the largest intergenerational wealth transfer in history. As many of you know, over the next few decades, younger generations will inherit over $60 trillion. Arts Funders Forum research indicates that those inheriting this wealth are turning away from the arts, and along with their new wealth creator peers, do not consider the arts as essential. Instead, they're prioritizing social, racial, and climate justice areas, education, and health. Simultaneously, data shows that giving to arts and culture remains ever more in a perilous position. Arts giving represents only 4% of overall charitable giving in the United States. So this is a massive problem to solve, and we at the Arts Funders Forum want to help solve it. So to this end, we like to highlight collaborations and new models that expand the reach, the relevancy, and the impact of the cultural ecosystem. I'm thrilled to partner with Museum Exchange for today's talk, using their platform, which is the first digital platform for art donations, which enables collectors to donate works of art to institutions across North America, using them as a launch point for a larger discussion. So we'll talk from a variety of vantage points with different folks about how these new models could create new pipelines and access for philanthropic investment in the arts, and how independent technology platforms can promote democratic and equitable collection building and engagement, and much more. So I am honored to introduce the four speakers with us here today, my co-organizers from Museum Exchange, Michael Darling and Joanne Cohen. Michael Darling is the co-founder and chief growth officer of Museum Exchange. Previously, Michael was the James Alsdorf chief curator of the Museum of Contemporary Art, the MCA, in Chicago from 2010 to 2021. While at the MCA, he organized many renowned exhibitions during his tenure, including Virgil Abloh, Figures of Speech, Takashi Murakami, The Octopus Eats Its Own Leg, Isaac Geskin, Retrospective, and many more. Prior to Michael's time at the MCA, he was the John and Mary Shirley Curator of Modern Contemporary Art at the Seattle Art Museum and the Associate Curator at the Museum of Contemporary Art in Los Angeles. Michael frequently serves as a panelist, writer, lecturer, and guest curator on contemporary art, design, and architecture. Joanne Cohen is the Director of Healthcare and Education for Museum Exchange, and she's the principal of JRC Art Advisory, a specialized firm focused on private, corporate, and nonprofit arts collections. She joined Museum Exchange in April 2021 after 14 years as the executive director and curator of the Cleveland Clinic Art Program, which she established in 2006 and built into what is now widely regarded as the preeminent art collection in the healthcare industry. Previously, Joanne served as curator for Progressive Insurance, known for their robust cutting-edge contemporary art collection. And she is a longtime member of the Association of Professional Art Advisors and a member of the board of MoCA Cleveland and Front International. Thank you, Michael and Joanne, for your partnership in organizing today's event. Rehema Barber is the chief curator for the Kalamazoo Institute of Arts, where she has curated exhibitions such as Yun Fei Ji, Tales of Scavenger, Africa Imagined, Reflections on Modern and Contemporary Art, and Unmasking Masculinity for the 21st Century, a collaboration with the curator Larry Osai-Mensah. She's also helped conceive of the reinstallation plan and theme for KAI's permanent collection. Previously, Rehema worked at the Tarbell Art Center at Eastern Illinois University, University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign, the University of Memphis, and the Amistad Center at the Wadsworth Atheneum Museum of Art. Rehema was the 2001 St. Louis Art Museum Romer Bearden Fellow, and she's contributed to numerous publications. She's currently working on the KIA's 100-year anniversary exhibition, as well as catalog highlights for the fall of 2024. Welcome, Rehema. Joshua Rogers is the Chief Executive Officer and founder of Arete Wealth Incorporated, and an avid collector of emerging and mid-career artists. As CEO, Josh is the steward of the firm's financial management products and services, offered to more than 100 offices and over 400 financial advisors nationwide. The company focuses on wealth management for high net worth individuals and democratizing alternative investment access. Recently, the firm was the #1 largest distributor of alternative investments in the United States. Josh is involved with the board of the Chicago chapter of YPO, Young Presidents Organization, and serves as an elected trustee of the Museum of Contemporary Art, Chicago. A graduate of St. John's College in Annapolis, Maryland, he is an elected trustee with the oversight of the college's finance, investment, and audit committees. Josh also teaches entrepreneurship at both St. John's Annapolis and Santa Fe campuses. Welcome to our speakers. For our program today, I will speak with our guests individually to learn more about their experiences and perspectives, and then we'll all come together for a group discussion at the end. That's when we'll take audience questions. So if you have questions for our group, please submit them in the Q&A box, no, not the chat box, for that section of the talk. So let's dive in. I'd like to welcome our first two speakers, Michael and Joanne from Museum Exchange. Hello, friends. How are you? Thank you for being here.
Thanks, Melissa. Great to join you.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you. And thank you for your partnership in putting this together. It's a great discussion. I'm looking forward. So let's jump in. So you have built a new model for the sector, and I like to say it's germinated from the sector. The team is experienced and trusted within the ecosystem, which seem to be keys and key factors to establishing a successful new model in what is a pretty traditional industry. Your model's working, so I'd love for you to just tell us why that is.
I mean, I think some of it's because we speak the language, the language of museums, the language of collectors. We know where the pain points are. We feel their pain, in many situations. And so we know kind of where we can be helpful and useful and help make their lives easier, but also where we shouldn't be pushing and where we know that, capacities might be limited. We understand especially how staffs at museums can fluctuate and how sometimes they just have to go offline for a while when it comes to collecting while they reorganize their staff. While they make new collection management documents and plans and strategies. So I think the probably is we're just very good listeners, and we're very understanding of some of those dynamics that museum professionals face on a daily basis, but then also how collectors operate, and especially with regards to their philanthropy. Joanne, if you have anything to add to that from your perspective.
Sure. I mean, I guess I'd also say, we're tech forward. So, we're about streamlining the process, and it's incredibly efficient. So if you've ever tried to give away artwork, it can be laborious at times. So this is a way to simplify the process for everyone on both sides of the equation.
And it's also, as we've discussed, a tool that previously didn't exist for folks that weren't already involved, and we're going to talk a lot more about this, in the ecosystem, to demystify a very opaque process. So Joanne, we've spoken about some experiences that you've had with folks that have inherited work that didn't know what to do with it. And we know that picking up a phone and calling a museum is not something people want to do or know how to do. It's a very opaque sector. So you also are creating, you're an opening for people to walk through and access, and they can find you online. It's very simple, and it's very clear if you go to your website what you do. So that clarity of mission, the process is incredibly clear, and it's also opening up to a wider range of people and democratizing a process that has typically happened behind closed doors that you have to be in the know how to do. So it's really fantastic what you guys have built. I want to ask you, Art Basel UBS 2023 Survey of Global Collecting report just came out. One of the data points I noticed was that 54% of high net worth collectors were planning to buy art over the next year, and 26% plan to sell works from their collection. And so, given the lure of the art market and the amount of money that is made, what have you found to be the most compelling argument for collectors to donate to a museum through your platform instead of just selling this work for cold, hard cash?
Well, I think there's maybe sort of two questions. One is those people that are fortunate enough to sell those 26% of those folks that are selling their art and maybe perhaps even making a profit on it might want to offset their capital gains with some donations of art. So that's tax deductions for sure are still a big priority for people. Getting rid of artworks that are sitting in storage and maybe unused and costing them money while they're sitting in storage is another for sure motivator. But then of course there's also the philanthropic aspect of this, and especially I think realizing that once you're a collector, once you're buying art by living artists in particular, you are a steward of that work. And so to sell it at a loss, especially publicly, where the data points can be accessed by people, is quite damaging to artists' careers. And perhaps passing it on to a museum or a hospital or a university is a better way to steward that artist's career and your responsibility of owning their work than to sort of sell it off. So in those situations, we see the artists, of course, being really thrilled that their work is not going back onto the market. We see the dealers that sold the work originally being very excited that this work is also going back into the public realm. And then the donors themselves are seeing the benefits of that, not only financially through the possibilities of getting tax deductions, but that that sense of doing the right thing, and the gratitude that they're receiving from the recipient museums all kind of contribute to that. I mean, I was at one of our donors' homes when one of those letters came in from a museum that just received their gift and thanking them. And so, this kind of virtuous cycle just keeps continuing and giving back. And so we see that on a daily basis.
And we're going to hear more from Josh about that too, as a collector that has participated on your platform, how that opens the door for a relationship and the process of cultivating and stewarding those donors where it didn't exist before, because in some cases the donor didn't know the museum didn't know the donor, right? And maybe the work wasn't even known. I love how you talk about the philanthropic aspect and stewarding it. And I also, and we've spoken about this, love the benefit that comes to the artist. And we talk about, the title of this is the democratization, and we're going to talk a lot about, equity as well, and how this process in some cases even involves the artist. The artist is asked about where the work is going to go and any preferences. So different types of agency and that the artist is offered, I think, are key. And that's offered through your platform. And it sounds like you have a very open conversation with all parties involved versus no secrets, nothing's happening behind closed doors. It's how do we make this work for everybody in a way that's a win-win-win-win.
And I think that the fact that we're doing donations and not selling art really makes everyone we're dealing with much more comfortable. The artists are happy about it because their work is going to a museum. The donors know that we're helping to solve a problem for them, and the gallerists as well. We're not stealing any sales away from them. We're actually helping to solve problems for them as well. So we're in this strange position of not really stepping on anyone's toes, and found this little niche within the art world ecosystem where we can really help move things along more smoothly. So.
I mean, for artists, it's a great exposure. I mean, the whole idea that their work is up there on a digital platform and 1,000 museum professionals might see it in the course of a few months is a pretty great opportunity for them. So they're pretty pleased about that.
I love that you brought that up, and we'll speak with Rehema about that as a curator who engages with your platform, that you've created this new catalog, right? And all of this access and the distribution is huge. I mean, again, the win-win-win aspect is amazing. one of the guiding theses we have here at AFF is that better and more effective storytelling is required to create relevancy for our sector. And our research illustrates that the stories the art sector has been telling are not resonating with a wider pool of next-gen audiences and supporters. And we all want to reach these groups. We all want to create a sustainable and resilient ecosystem. And get that 4% charitable giving number up, right? We want a bigger piece of the charitable pie in the art sector. Michael, something you've said is that you see with this younger mindset that they ask, does the museum mean what it says? And I see that in my work as well, that emerging donors, philanthropists, supporters, collectors, they want to see things within museums and arts organization like board composition. What works the institution collects. They want to see their staff makeup. They want to see their evidence of social impact through metrics and storytelling. They want to know what the brand associations are. They want to know about investment policies and basically to see how authentic these organizations are. So really what we're talking about is folks seeking shared values. So given the inroads that you guys have made through Museum Exchange with this incoming generation of collectors and donors, talk about what you see and you hear from them that they want to see, and what are they and what are they not seeing within our sector?
Yeah, I think it's for sure an issue. I'm anecdotally, I feel like there's a lot of backsliding has happened since all of the tumult and potential for change that happened in summer of 2020 and just following that time period. And the place, so I think museums are still trying to figure out how to tell a story about impact, especially kind of community impact and community relevance. The place where I'm seeing a lot of traction really is in the area of university art museums. Their mission is so clear and clearly tied to an educational prerogative that they can tell these stories with real data and real impact. And there's been a couple of situations that we've worked on recently that where you're just seeing that. There's one gift that's not totally complete yet, so I won't say exactly what it is, but artwork was just put on view at a university art museum in the Northeast. And already when they're doing tours through the exhibition, they're having to pull students away from this work to keep them moving along to the next thing. And professors have identified this piece as something they want to teach with. So we're seeing things come into these museums that can really change them quite radically. Or even another situation, we're working right now with the Weatherspoon at the University of North Carolina in Greensboro on a big gift. And of course, they've just been in the news because of the Supreme Court pulling back affirmative action, and that was a university that was a real leader in that area. And so looking for ways to continue those commitments in new ways, and art can be a powerful tool for those kinds of conversations and those kinds of feelings of inclusion and community and things like that. So I think that there's some real bright spots there in the university museum side of things that maybe even other non-academic museums could learn from.
Yeah, I would add that in these academic institutions, they're not just collecting the art within the walls of a museum or gallery, but the art is infusing the campus life in many different ways. So students and faculty can access it very differently.
And you're talking about broader reach and access, right? And a lot of times, no admission fee,
Precisely.
Those three things are really interesting. So the art that is free for all and anyone can come see it and housed in that educational, within that educational mission, that's really fascinating. And, Rehema, who we'll talk to next, Kalamazoo is an educational institution, is a teaching museum. So we can dig more into that. Launching off of that, Joanne, you are an expert in building collections for healthcare and the education sector. And we here at AFF believe that the cultural sector can learn a lot from other sectors' models and work, and specifically how they engage with art. You've said that your goal is to transform the paradigm of art in a healthcare setting. noting that the rationale or mission for collecting is not monolithic. So tell us about this and how these other sectors engage with art collecting and the relationships that you see form between the donor of the work and a healthcare institution or an educational institution.
Sure. Big question, a little bit of time, so I'll try and be succinct and
We keep
address it.
we keep it really narrow here.
We'll try. So I guess I would say, this is sort of, based primarily on my experience at Cleveland Clinic for almost 15 years. There are a lot of patients who are grateful patients who want to give back in some way. Art is one of the many ways in which they can do that. And at the end of the day, it's all about wellness and empathy. And, I don't need to tell everyone on this call why art is important, right? But the healthcare industry has really recognized the power of art in a healthcare setting. So, we know anecdotally, we hear all kinds of testimonials about how art can be transformative, right? And in a healthcare setting, especially, it's incredibly stressful. You want art as a way to alleviate stress, create a moment of levity, beauty, transport you elsewhere. There's a lot of employee burnout. It's a tough place to work, especially these past few years. So healthcare has been really great in thinking about metrics, and let's look at actually how it impacts that setting. So, for instance, when I was at Cleveland Clinic, we did a bunch of studies that were published on the impact of interacting with a contemporary art collection. And we were able to, come up with hard data on how experiencing that artwork impacts one's mood, stress level, pain and comfort, and overall satisfaction. So 72% of the people who interacted with artwork in one of our studies said that their mood was somewhat, if not significantly, improved. And 60% said that their stress level went down. Overall satisfaction was at about 60%. Pain and comfort was improved by 35%. These are all metrics that you want to hear, right? Another institution, Roswell Cancer Center, they did a study of oncology patients post-surgery, and they actually had them look at an art gallery they had with rotating exhibitions, and there they were able to look at and really find great data on how the people who interacted in the galleries had their mood improved, their higher hope, it lessened their anxiety, and it really helped with their mental health. So, there are many examples like that. I'm happy to share those studies afterward if anyone's interested. But and so donors really see that it's palpable, whether it's hearing those metrics or, you might be walking through the hospital that you frequent and you just see the impact. We gave art to dialysis centers in New York City. Those are really kind of tough places to be. Patients go there for extended periods of time every week, and just placing artwork in these long white hallways, transforms right away. Or you might see a Jennifer Steinkamp video on the wall somewhere, and patients and visitors are going over to embrace it, dance with a revolving tree, find different ways to transport yourself elsewhere out of, when it's a tough situation.
I love that. And thank you for sharing those statistics. I mean, yes. And I love that you said this, everyone here, I think, believes in the power of art, but we don't necessarily believe in the power of data or metrics as much as other sectors do. And just those statistics that you mentioned, the 72% of people who interacted with art said improved mood, 60% said the stress levels decreased, those are amazing statistics. And, we are in a permanent change scenario in the world. We are lurching from crises to crises. We are whipped up into a frenzy by social media about everything. And so places where we can go to center, to ground, to be present are increasingly hard to find. And so how can arts organizations and museums, present and lead with that data that can be helpful? Because it's surely a compelling reason for folks to give to a healthcare institution that you can save someone's life by lowering their stress level while they're undergoing an intense medical procedure. So, well, thank you guys both. We will see you in a few minutes for the group conversation. Thank you so much, Joanne and Michael. And now we will speak with Rehema Barber. There she is. Hello. How are you?
I'm fine. How are you? Thank you for the invitation to be with you today.
Thank you so much for being here. It's been such a pleasure to get to know you through this process. So we'll jump right in. As I mentioned, you are a curator who works with Museum Exchange. So I'd love for you to just tell us about this new model, how you've worked with it, how has it been successful for you, especially in terms of broadening your network to
Mhm.
collectors and also broadening the type of work that you're able to collect for the
Oh,
institution.
yeah. Well, yes, gosh, big question, short time, right? Um, so Music Exchange has really been, our Museum Exchange has really been a wonderful platform to get to know. Honestly, it really has opened up quite a few doors for us as far as we had identified that we had some mid-century gaps in our sort of mid-century collection. And like right out the gate, one of our first donors, made sure that we had a painting from that period and really liked what we were doing, and then continued to donate works to us. And I kind of did a tally because we've only been doing Museum Exchange. This is our second year doing it. But in that time, we have received 7 gifts, which is pretty tremendous, and totaling, well over 6 figures. And when we think about access, that's really central to our mission when we're writing these proposals that you have to write. They're actually really succinct proposals. They allow us to tell a story about who our institution is and what our collection is the stories our collection is telling, and how we see this work fitting into our collection. So for us, we, as you said previously, we really are centering the storytelling aspect of our collection, and when we're making these connections with the donors and the gifts and identifying potential gifts. But we're also thinking about how it connects to our school. We have a school that has been around for almost as long as we have been around. We're about to celebrate our 100th year anniversary. And the school teaches ceramics and painting and printmaking and photography and everything else. I could go down the actual list. It really, and the facilities actually rival some university and settings. So I'm always thinking about how these works coming into our collection, how they connect to those students, to our faculty as well. So it's not just amplifying the stories that we're trying to tell curatorially. It's also about the stories that I hope the students get, and the inspiration I hope the students get from the artwork as well. And then I think you asked about sort of the donors, the donor experience. I think that sometimes the donors have been really, some are like, this is what I want to give, and that's great. And we've tried to nurture that. One of the things that we do for all gifts that come into our organization, we always let the donor know when it's on view, when it's traveling, sending catalogs when it's featured, just to make sure that donors understand the impact of their gift, because that's really important to us. And also, really wanting them to understand that these works are being seen. They're not going into our storage facility. They are going to be seen and on view. They're going to be used for teaching. They're going to be used for exhibitions, and potentially loaned to other institutions. So that is really what we've been trying to communicate, and it's been a really successful model thus far for us.
Amazing. I love how you said, the work that you do to really collect, to connect with the mission and the storytelling. And that's hard to do with a small pool. When you only have X amount of folks and collectors you're working with, but these independent platforms, these independent models are opening up for you, opening up for conversation, you to a much bigger pool that will allow you to, I would imagine, better, connect, to tell that story better, to tell that story more deeply, because you have a broader choice of work or stuff that's come up that you wouldn't normally see through the pool that you have. So again, it is widening the pool. It's, creating an opportunity to democratize the pool of folks that you're working with so that more people have entry into it, and therefore you have wider options.
No, absolutely. And
Yeah.
I think that even thinking about the variety of artists that we are looking at, I mean, the platform is very robust and diverse in that, there have been works that we have gotten that have been from Japanese artists, or there are works that are, totally situated within the American canon. So I think that it's very robust as far as what's being offered. I think that the museum exchange is also really communicative about, what the works are. And honestly, my team and I, we can't wait until we get to see the offerings every quarter. I think we are really as soon as we submit our first level of proposals in that sort of quarterly cycle, we're also looking to the next cycle to see and sometimes things work out where we have been able to submit almost every cycle, and sometimes it doesn't. I think since we become members, certainly we have submitted about 4 proposals, and of those 4, 3 have come to us. So
Amazing. Something you've said, Rehema, is that 21st century organizations must be very pragmatic in their approach when we're talking about engaging new publics, new audiences, new donors. And as I discussed with Michael and Joanne, we're living in an environment that really prioritizes shared values. Mm-hmm. And you said in that context, institutions must be frank about who they are in order to best align with donors. And we know from our research, again, that donors want to have community impact, and they can achieve community impact through the donation of work. You've talked about how we need to be honest, and what I love, unafraid to lose money and outgrow donors if it no longer aligns. And that funders and the community want to know where institutions stand. So institutions need to prioritize transparency and pursue equity with donors. So again, we're talking about democratizing the base of support here, right?
Right.
So these new platforms and technologies like Museum Exchange can help in this process of democratizing the engagement pipeline, and therefore can help shift the mentality for organizations and their boards about what current cultivation practices could and should be, how do we create more equity in who we are working with, and a lot more. So as through your experiences within the arts sector and system, what do you see as the priorities for change, and how can we think creatively about new ways of doing our business in order to bring about this change?
Well, I kind of want to go back to the part, because I know people's ears probably perked up when you said to lose money. I want to clarify, because I think the thing is when we look at who the traditional profile of donors are, they have historically been white and male, right? But the field itself is very much female oriented as far as the arts, especially in museums. And the reality is that there is money out there from other communities. You have to know who your community is, right? So there are these levels of community within your wider, broader community. And, I think about someone like my grandmother, who, bless her heart, I mean, she was a very modest woman, but, in the end, when I looked back and we were handling her affairs at the end, she had given so much money to these other organizations. And I realized that, you really just have to ask. And if you think about it, it's great to have this mega donor. It's wonderful to get this sort of huge gift and say, okay, this is what we're doing with it. This is how it's in action, and this is your impact. But for me, I think that, really museums need to be looking at those sort of aggregate donors, right? The long-term donors, those people that will send you something every month because they believe in what you are doing. Because in the long run, I mean, my grandmother ended up, I think, gifting, over the course of 10 years to one organization, tens of thousands of dollars. And no one knew about it. She didn't talk about it. And we had no idea until the end, right? And so that's a model that I think we don't pursue enough, because we're looking at sort of those bigger donors. And then I also think about, one of my favorite organizations is down in Memphis, Tennessee, and it's called Hattie Lou Theater. And I'm giving a shout out because I remember when that organization was incredibly scrappy. And I was talking to the director. He was a good friend during my time in Memphis. And we talked about him building this program called the Small But Mighty Donor Program. And it really transformed that organization. Because one, you have, and it's a Black repertory theater. So you have people in the community that are funding in small but mighty ways, saying that no donation is too small and will be put to use. And I think that too is a model that we can incorporate and fold in, because we don't have to be, hand to mouth. And I think, when it comes down to it, it's also about how we engage with those communities. In order for you to bring in more LGBTQ community members, you have to be speaking to that experience. In order to have more members of Asian descent in your building and coming to your programs, you need to be speaking to those concerns. But so you have to know that you have an exchange happening between your institution and your community, and always be centering that, always being mindful of audience, always being mindful that museums are teaching institutions. I know that sometimes, I remember when I first started in this field, there was a saying about us being edutainment. Well, I kind of take that away. I get we're there to entertain in some ways, but really for me, it's about education in all facets, right? You can educate your donor base. You can educate the people that are donating to you and help them grow in their understanding of what it is that you do and where it is that you want to go. And I think that is what we need to be focusing on, right? Is not only just being a place where people feel like they could be entertained, but to Joanne's point when she pulled out those figures, we do need to be places that center wellness and well-being. And you can do that with education, right? The more you know, the better you are. So I mean, I think you have to sort of have that balance. And also I think you do have to be unafraid to sort of shift and pivot. I think that was shown to us through the pandemic, right? Like everyone has to shift and pivot. The idea that we can now have conversations like this from our respective offices across the US makes it's a different platform, but it amplifies our message more, right? So I think that's another aspect. We have to be able to know that we can shift, we can change, we can try new things. And when we see things modeled in other industries, I don't find it, I think that we should take notice of that. If it's working, why can't we implement some aspects of those strategies in our field, right? We're creatives, so we should always be innovating, right? That's what our field is about.
Thank you for that. And I love that you talked about your grandmother. Thank you for sharing that, because the data shows us women really are the future of philanthropy, increasingly making decisions, increasingly inheriting wealth. And within the philanthropic industry, there's a lot of conversation about what that means for the profession and cultivation and stewardship. Thank you so much, Rehema. We're going to go to Josh and we'll all come back together at the end. So Josh Rogers, welcome.
Hi, Melissa.
Hey, Josh, thanks for being here.
Absolutely, my pleasure.
So we've talked with the creators and the folks that run Museum Exchange. We've talked with the curator who interfaces with it. in her role, and you are a collector who participates in the platform to place work. So can you tell us about what this new platform for a traditional practice has offered you that you haven't necessarily gotten before? And especially as it relates to creating more access to new institutions for you with the work that you collect.
Yeah, I've had a really positive experience with Museum Exchange, and it's been an enlightening journey, and also I would say a lot of things that Michael talked about at the very beginning in terms of some of the I don't know some of the feelings that one gets in terms of uh, donating art in a way that potentially makes a positive difference for all kinds of institutions, and in some cases institutions that I didn't even know existed. And so it was not only has Museum Exchange been really successful placing works from our collection. I think I don't know the exact number, somewhere between 13, 15, maybe even more than that. But and then in that process, when you sort of submit or say to the folks at Museum Exchange, here's some of the artworks I would be willing to donate. You don't really get to, you don't really get to say, and I'd only be willing to donate them to these places. Instead, Museum Exchange finds homes for this work, and so those homes, so to speak, or those recipient institutions, in my case, were as diverse as places like the Fairfield County, Connecticut Museum of Art, the Boca Raton Museum of Art, Milwaukee Museum of Art, the Carnegie in Pittsburgh, the Krannert Museum at the University of Illinois. So a lot of different museums around the country ended up wanting to accept artworks that we were donating, and I think that there was just an aspect of that I thought was kind of cool, that it's kind of getting out there, really at a nationwide level.
There's my mute button. Thank you for sharing that. What I think is so interesting is that with this new model and how you're interfacing with it is that we need new people in our sector. We need more access to folks who do collect, and to donors and to supporters who might just support institutions in their own city because they don't have necessarily a connection with something somewhere else. And what this platform does is, as I said with Rehema, is really expand that reach. And it just reinforces to me that this process of cultivating new audiences and donors is an industry lift. It is not up to the job of one development person in one institution to find all the new money in America, right? And so you just described how your interaction with this has just, I think of the nodes, coming out and like expanding the reach of your collection, creating and deepening relationships you have, and importantly with these institutions that want to show this work, building that bridge to you. And it's essential, and it takes the entire sector to do that. I want to ask you, in this regard, so you're being introduced to these new institutions, and then they can add you to their pipeline to cultivate and steward you and work with you, build a relationship, and deepen that. So we have fundraisers and museum directors on the call today. So I'm hoping you can tell us what some of the best development work you've seen in this regard with these institutions you've developed a new relationship with because of your participation on the platform.
Sure. Well, I should disclose at the outset that that of all the museums that I've mentioned, and there's a few that I'm sure I've forgotten. Michael would probably know them better than even I would. I have not yet donated any cash to any of those other institutions. However, I did receive very nice, nice letters. Some were better than others. Some sort of felt a little bit more, kind of formulaic, just kind of a typed out letter. The one that stands out in my mind is the Cranach Museum of Art at the University of Illinois. They wrote like a really nice, somebody wrote a very nice handwritten letter, and there's just a little bit more effusiveness about their excitement, and they specifically mentioned that they planned on having a show that was going to include like 4 of the works that I donated to them. So that, and then they invited me to come down to the show when it's going to go up. It's not up yet. I think it's scheduled for 2024. But that was really nice. And so that's the kind of something like the idea of utilizing the works that are being donated, or maybe like building a show around it, and that my thinking was, and I think I would suggest that if there's an opportunity to maybe even if they're looking to cultivate a donor and they've received, say, 1 work, maybe there's a way to put on a show and then ask that donor if they might lend other works that sort of speak within that. Oftentimes, collectors, we tend to collect in a way where the works kind of speak to one another, right? There could be themes or whatever else it might be, or certain artist friend groups. And so if there was a show or something like that that included other works or whatever, I think that might help to kind of engage collectors more deeply in those new institutions. And then, of course, I also would recommend that if there was like a development person that kind of was like following up from the curatorial side, and so then there might be more of an opportunity to kind of engage or get that donor more excited, or at least speaking for myself, I would be more excited about potentially supporting, more thoroughly supporting the financial mission of that institution. But it would have to be a little. There's some work that needs to be done there. So.
Well, it's a new pool, and you already have some affiliation with that institution because your work is there, right? So it's yes, it's someone following up and doing it, and then doing that good development work, but you didn't exist to each other before. And that's what I find really fantastic about a new model, independent of one organization, that is helping the entire sector with this connection and promoting philanthropy through collecting. Josh, you are we've talked about this, the need for better storytelling within our sector. I spoke about it with Joanne and Michael, as our research illustrates that the current stories the art sector's been telling have just not been resonating with next-gen audiences and supporters. You are what I consider a next-gen donor. Many consider a next-gen donor. You clearly love and see the value of a healthy arts ecosystem. You support it really from that 360 to artist support. You buy from galleries, you go to art fairs, you give to museums. But I'd like you to tell us about your peers who might not necessarily have as deep of an affiliation, but who the industry really wants to cultivate as supporters, audiences, advocates, and eventually major gift donors. So I'm wondering if you can tell us, shed some light on those peers of yours, your next gen cohort. Do they support the arts? And if not, which I think is what we're talking about here, then why not? What did he tell you?
Well, I mean, you're delving into a little bit more, some possibly controversial territory here, Melissa.
That's okay. We could go there. I'll leave it to you.
Well, I think that like both, I was, listening to your conversation in particular with Rehema, I think it was really illustrative of, and sort of beginning, it was going down this road a little bit. And I guess what I was thinking about and how I was feeling when I was listening to to Rehema's comments, and there were a lot of things I really agreed with her on when she talked about like engaging different communities. I'm going to say that I think that the nonprofit art ecosystem, the people who are attracted to working in it, you guys talked about it being predominantly female. I think it also has a very heavy skew toward a certain set of beliefs and political ideologies, and are very passionate about those, which is great. But it's also the case that like true civil discourse means that oftentimes the people who are the donors might not necessarily have exactly the same beliefs, ideologies, and political viewpoints as those who are in the arts sector. So there is a tendency, just speaking from my own experience, where it's kind of like, I'm very much in favor of productive civil discourse that helps us to come together, right, as a people. And that's one of the things that I think art can do. But let's say if we're sort of saying, hey, you're either like on our team or you're not on our team. And if you have any other opinions that are not on our team, then, go to hell. Well, that has that has a tendency to alienate a lot of people. So I think that's one thing to kind of keep in mind. And I do think that it would be really interesting if more museums had shows that were sort of that, to the extent that they do engage with political art, which certainly is an important aspect of the art world, that perhaps there's a way where that can be done in a way where there's actually showing like art that shows multiple sides of a particular issue, right? So that we can increase our empathy for both sides of the equation. And so I think that's something for everyone to consider. It's really tough for donors to sort of get excited about donating money to organizations if they kind of feel like the organization is telling them that they're bad, right? And so, or so that's I'm sure you can understand that's a tough proposition. I think the other issue is that I think you mentioned this, Melissa, the impact of social media and even just the way that our news media is. It sort of has a tendency that there's always like a new conflagration going on in the world or something. There's almost like what I'll call an outrage economy. And I think that does cause a lot of donors to sort of all of a sudden want to put money over into whatever the latest problem is. So, when it was Ukraine and Russia, I noticed a lot of like sort of younger donors or middle-aged donors, a lot of people were pouring money toward supporting Ukraine, for example. Right now, obviously, with what's going on in the Middle East, there's a lot of attention and a lot of money going in that direction. So there becomes this question of like, what does art have to say about that? And sometimes I think there is a little bit of a feeling that perhaps art is like a nice to have, but not a must have. And so perhaps there's a question, perhaps there's a way to rethink what is the urgency of art? Like why does it urgently matter in terms of helping us to become a more mutually empathetic society? How can we use art, for example, to like break down divisions, to break down the tribalism that we see that is, I think, kind of splitting us apart as a society right now. But that also means being respectful to to the entire panoply of those various different views. So anyway, those are some of my thoughts.
Thank you, Josh. Appreciate it. Let's bring everyone back. We're going to keep the conversation going. Welcome back, Joanne, Rehema, and Michael. Hello, everyone. I have some questions prepared for you, but I want to leave the floor open and let anyone jump in to respond to anything anyone said, potentially the last part that Josh was talking about.
Yeah. Josh, I loved what he had to say. I want to send so many like applause because he's right. I mean, like, you don't want to alienate your donors. And I think you can 100%, bring donors along and help educate them. I mean, like, it's just, it's so simple. It's the why, right? And I love what he had to say about presenting two sides of a civil discourse, especially in exhibitions. I had a show that you mentioned, Unmasking Masculinity. I worked with Larry Osei-Mensah on it. And I think a lot of people had these preconceived ideas that this show may have been about LGBTQ issues, but really it was a very broad show that looked at how masculinity has shifted from 1960s to present. Like, the Marlboro Man trope is not a thing now in our day and age. And so, like, for us, it was really about showing the ways in which, how we think about masculinity has changed. And I think that it was so well received because of that. And I think, to Josh's point, like, you can use art to talk about, what's happening in society today. I mean, the whole impetus for the show for for us was just, I had read an article about how men felt left behind, and they had men across all different spectrums. And they were saying in this current moment with political unrest, there were men that were like, I don't feel like I have a place in our society, in our world. And so for me, it was like, well, no, that can't be. We have to show people that may be feeling similarly that yes, there is a place for you, but maybe it's changed a little bit, right? And how can you become more comfortable with like this shift in our culture? And so when you have like a platform like Museum Exchange, which has had such wide ranging works, I mean, you have works, for instance, I think someone asked about this. I feel like I saw Sadie Barnett has come through, or some other really important artists of color have come through on the platform. And you can tell those nuanced stories, right? Because you have someone that's looking, that are building these platforms to help you tell these stories much better for your community, right? So I just wanted to like give you an applause, Josh, because I was like totally like snaps.
Thanks,
And
Rehema.
I'd love to chime in if that's okay. Major applause to Josh and Rehema for all of that. And also want to dispel the myth, in healthcare and art, the arts isn't just about, having pretty pictures on the wall. It's about having compelling and interesting and challenging artwork as well, because it's a jumping off point. So to Josh's point and Rehema, I mean, art builds bridges. And so in healthcare, I mean, the same is true. We did similar exhibitions where, we might have featured an artist from the Middle East who showcased 3 different types of religion, and it was an opportunity for the spiritual care services people to host programs and create ways to talk about uncomfortable things. So all of that is really key and relevant to it all, and they're thinking about the same considerations that museums are. They want to make the art relevant to their audiences, whatever their particular demographics are. And if you have a big healthcare system, they might have patients from over 100 countries or employees from that many. So all of that is really key to making it more germane and resonate more to them.
We got the hearts from Michael. I want to ask you guys, I mean, we've heard from all of you now, the platform is clearly successful. It's clearly doing what you set out for it to do. And I want to ask, why aren't there more of these? Not necessarily in terms of the collection, but what do you guys think as participants in the ecosystem, that philosophically or, holds us back from building new models to really to connect people to, whether that's through philanthropic support, collecting, financial support of financial capital, collecting, engagement. Why do you think more haven't been created? I stumped you.
Well, I'll take a stab at it. I mean, I think Joanne made a comment that was spot on, which is that believe it or not, the process of even just giving away a piece of art is actually quite complicated. In order to do it like the right way and to sort of paper it correctly and everything else, you would think it should be on the surface. If you've never done it, it would seem quite easy, but it turns out there's quite a lot of paperwork involved. And in some cases, from the beginning of like when a museum accepts a work of art to the process of actually getting it shipped there, and then like final, like all the, sort of deeds of transference and all these different elements of it. I mean, it can take 6 to 9 months in some cases. So it's actually a lot more complicated. And so I think that certainly is a barrier to, I guess I'll call it scale, which is what you're asking. And I think Michael hit it right on the head too at the beginning when he said that, the reason it's working at Museum Exchange is because, it was founded by, Michael and his partners who are, very, really kind of deeply in the ecosystem and understood all the ins and outs and how to dot the I's and how to cross the T's in terms of making this happen. I'll also say that there's costs along the way in all of this. Okay. So, museum exchange has to get paid. The appraisers have to get paid. And so one of the things that I've experienced is that if one is donating a work of art, that if the appraisal value ends up being, say, less than about $40,000 of the piece of art, the collector actually ends up having to pay, the amount of money that the collector pays just to donate the work is in excess of the value of the tax deduction. So in other words, it actually costs the collector money just to give away the work of art. Okay, so that means that also dramatically reduces the scalability of this, because where it starts to make more economic sense for the donor is to be giving away works of art that have values in excess of $40,000, which is, of course, in general, I think that's a lesser amount of work. And you're also talking about work then that those collectors could theoretically auction and just get the full value of that money, versus just instead getting, say, 30% of the value or something along those lines in terms of the tax deduction. So those are some of the just pure economic barriers to even more scalability beyond. That's why, in my view, I'm not sure that they're really, I think Museum Exchange has a very good, what we call competitive moat, to use that terminology in business. I don't really see any other potential competitors being able to get into this space. It's really not, I don't know that I'm not even sure the market is big enough to accommodate a second competitor.
Yeah, Josh is right. There is a whole band of lesser valued artworks where, if you factor in our fees, if you factor in the fees that you need to pay an appraiser to get the certified appraisal that the IRS wants, the math starts to get a little bit trickier at those lower values. And one way we've tried to help with that is by oftentimes bundling those lesser value pieces together. So we only charge one fee when we place that whole group of works. Likewise, the appraisers charge less in those situations because it's oftentimes the same artist going to only one institution, those kinds of things. So there definitely are still some tweaks to the business model to make sure that we're not losing out, and that the donors and the museums aren't losing out on important artworks that still might not have a huge financial value. So Josh is absolutely right about that.
Another way is that, sometimes a donor can say, I'm not concerned about the tax benefits. I just want to give this away. I don't need to get an appraisal. I don't need all those benefits. So that's one other way to handle things at times.
I want to be cognizant of everybody's time. We've gone a little over, but that's okay. And open this up to any last thoughts or statements you want to put out there to the community about how you see models such as this, again, democratizing our base of supporters and audiences within the art sector, and any advice you have for folks on this call or who are going to listen to the recording who really want to build a new model, but specifically independent of institutions, to help this, for rising tides to lift all boats and help those numbers in our sector get a lot better. Any advice you may have and last thoughts you may have about this topic? We'll start with Rehema.
I think the only thing that I could add is, and I've said it, I think from the beginning to the end, is just, when you're thinking about building your collection, you really should be thinking about your community, and the stories that you want to tell in your community that will have long lasting impact. And when you think about what impact is, it is not something that you're going to be putting in storage, right? It's something that that you're going to be using consistently. I am a huge fan of collecting, but I am not a huge fan of having collections in storage, even though we have storage facilities. So I think, art is for the people. And if you're going to collect, it's really important that you're also keeping people at the center of that too.
Thank you.
My answer is very similar to Rehema, so I'll just jump in to say that likewise, I think folks, when they are collecting, really should try to think a couple steps ahead about where that art is going to go in the future. Is it going to be able to be sold again? Are your kids going to want it? Is your local museum going to want it, or perhaps another museum elsewhere? Because I think I see a lot of overconsumption of art in the art market that is not going to have find an easy place in the future, whether it's through reselling, donation. So just kind of keeping that in mind in your mental checklist as you're out there looking at art.
Thank you. Josh, Joanne?
I think everyone's covered so much great ground. I mean, the only thing I would add is, at the end of the day, so much of this is about centering artists, and so, thinking about, to Michael's point, how to support artists where their art will be viewed most and seen, and thinking about their legacies at the same time.
Thank you.
Melissa, just thanks for creating an opportunity for civil discourse and dialogue. Thank you.
My pleasure, my goal. Thank you guys so much. This was great. We have some outstanding questions from the audience, and if anyone in the audience wants to submit their question to our email, info@artsfundersforum.com, then I can share it with the panelists and we can get an answer back to you. So this has been great. Thank you, Joanne and Michael, for your partnership. Thank you, Rehema and Josh, for joining us. I want to thank you all for your generosity of time and your energy, and acknowledge the incredible work you're doing for our sector. Thank you so much. So I also want to thank today's producer, Hadley Mitchell of M+D. I want to thank the Arts Funders Forum Advisory Board. They provide incredible counsel for our platform, our series sponsor, Kickstarter, and my Arts Funders Forum partners, Sean McManus and Brett Dobbs. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. And stay connected with Arts Funders Forum on Instagram, LinkedIn, via email at info@artsfundersforum.com. Thank you so much, and we will see you next time. Happy Thanksgiving to all.
Happy Thanksgiving.
Thank you.